Tahir Zaman, International Alert. It seems to me that the international agencies, humanitarian actors, are kind of playing catch-up, and the Syrian diaspora organization being on the ground are a lot more responsive to what's happening on the ground. Mulham mentioned how Syria Relief is now engaged in working around education, so we've moved away from relief and humanitarian towards development. So, given that the situation is changing so rapidly, the needs of people on the ground are changing so rapidly, is the Syrian diaspora the best placed actors to respond to those rapid changes? And should we not be thinking more long-term as well? I mentioned from International Alert, and we've been looking at questions around diaspora and peace building.
Okay, that's quite a significant question and a real challenge to the speakers. So, but let me take one or two others. Mazen, long time no see.
Thank you. Mazen Ishbah from Help for Syria. Problems have been identified, but lessons it's not being taken. So it's just like we repeat in a lot of our meetings, that conflict's been for decades, wars, whether man-made or God-made. And all the problems have been identified long ago. How are you going to guarantee this time that the Syrian conflict is not going to be another lesson is not being taken? What are you going to do different than all other conflicts, which is we already know the problems about them and how we're supposed to have avoided it, yet we're still talking about the same thing now.
Okay, that's another fundamental question. Would like to come in, perhaps with an easier question from somebody? Okay, a gentleman, a lady here, sorry, please.
Hi, this is just picking up Eva's point.
And your name, sorry?
My name's Olivia. Just picking up Eva's point about the impact of the counterterrorism legislation on charities, local NGOs, and it sounds like Syria Relief and Hand in Hand have a presence in the UK. Would it be possible to give some practical examples of how the legislation has impacted on your operations and what practical improvements or way forward can there be, given that that is the legislative framework that we're all operating under?
Correct. Well, really good questions. Why don't we start with Tahir's question about whether this is the right approach. Who would like to start?
Yeah,
Rula?
happy to. I want to move away from the dichotomy of us and them, because I think we are all the international humanitarian actors. This is the same industry, and we're all trying to actually achieve the same thing. And so I don't want it to be an us and them talk. I want it to be a unification of us all to say, how do we deal with this horrendously complicated and heartbreaking situation. So, and I think that can only happen with all of us working together, and that is the Syrian diaspora with the INGOs, with the UN systems and funders. But I think that we absolutely need to be at the heart of that response and answer. And the way that we can do that is to build our capacity. And we kind of bandy that word around a lot. But I'd like to kind of give a few concrete ideas. I mean, Eva, you mentioned that, of what that really means to us. At Hand in Hand, for example, we've just done a bond health check assessment. We've done an organizational assessment. We know specifically where our needs are and what we actually need to develop, where are our strengths and where are our weaknesses. So if you come to me as our INGO partner or a capacity builder, I can tell you very, very exactly where those are. And what we want is an organizational development, move away from the technical knowledge, from the one-day training. I'd like to see a system where we have a buddy system, where there is a mentoring of the NGO, where we actually have support with strategic planning, where we have someone who's there with us in the NGO who can say, okay, you've been to training 1, 2, and 3. Have you taken that learning to the organization? Has it improved your systems? Has it put in place structures? And measure our our performance against that, because that's the only way that actually the INGOs are going to learn how useful the training is. And that's the only way we're going to know how it's being effective. So I think there are very concrete ways in which we can do that. But yeah, that's a long answer to your question.
Well, how you wanted to come in and then?
Well, what I can say, I mean, over the past 4 years, we have built up quite an excellent relationship with other INGOs in UK and equally in Turkey. We have been working like a two-way system. Of course, the diaspora actually not been able to fund the projects, not being able to send the aid, because I can tell you simply our pockets actually just dried up. So the cash actually is now available in the hands of the INGOs, and we can deliver on the ground. We have the manpower, they have the cash, we have reached to them, and they have generously actually given us, but we need more. So we're still learning. We are learning from them, and they are learning from us. The problem is actually crossing the borders. This is the major problem. Who actually can cross the border? Can the INGOs do that? At the moment, at the moment they can't. Even the UN sending their aid into Syria through the local charities. Some of them registered, like even some of them registered in Turkey or Lebanon or UK, and the majority are not. So we are relying on the INGOs on the cash. We are actually providing projects to them based on the need assessment. We have a huge database now available to us. We talk about hundreds of thousands of people in need. We have improved our access within the territories inside Syria through the local councils. We have improved our relationship. Now our name has grown up, so they know us. We don't really belong to anybody. We are neutral. They know that we are impartial. We can deliver to them. So we need the INGOs to actually to join us in this trust and say we can deliver what you want us to deliver.
Okay. Eva, any observations from you?
Mazen, your question about, is there guarantee that this same mistakes will not happen? I don't think there is ever a guarantee in a conflict. Yes, sadly. I think certainly there are lessons to be learned, and I think this kind of environment and perhaps other fora that are away from the public, where you can share some of these ideas, where you don't have to be afraid that you put somebody in danger. I think these should be explored. I think perhaps also on something that Rula mentioned, the mentoring or perhaps secondment. How about an INGO saying, okay, we're going to send somebody to be with you for 6 months and vice versa, so there can be that dialogue. I don't think there's ever a guarantee that the same mistakes will not happen, but let's try to make this one, learn from this one, and perhaps apply lessons from other conflicts. And perhaps maybe just to Olivia's point, I know you addressed it to the Syrian NGOs, but just to say that
this is about the counterterrorism.
The effects of counterterrorism. So not just NGOs are affected, but banks as well, for example. Banks have been quite reluctant in funding NGOs because they're actually not sure whether they're opening themselves up to potential criminal liability, because this legislation can be at times ambiguous. And we've recently published a report where we're giving recommendations both to the charity sector, NGOs, but also banks, and where we say there needs to be more guidance on some of this legislation, because the perception is that if we do something, then we might be criminally liable, and perhaps that is not the case. But because it's so ambiguous, there needs to be more guidance.
Rebecca, any thoughts?
To go back to Tahir's question, I would echo very much what Rula has said, that let's stop this conversation about us and them. We're the same international aid community, and we need to work together. Many local organisations inside, and as I've said, Mercy Corps is working with almost 100 local organisations inside Syria. They have the access. They not just the access, they have the contextual understanding, they have the community acceptance, they have the needs assessment information, they have, they're there. What do we have from the INGO side? We can provide support, we can provide the capacity building, the secondments, they're very concrete examples of that, to help them get better. And this is about developing civil society, local organisations are part of that. We can provide technical support because I don't think it's just about cash. Humanitarian cash and funding is decreasing, quite frankly. Just because Syrian organisations aren't seeing that money, INGOs are not seeing, any increase in their funding from our side either. What we need to start looking at is designing programs that are not just about service delivery, but about and not about recovery, because unfortunately this conflict's going to go on for 5, 10, God knows how many years. But let's start looking at handing over ownership of the emergency response to local actors, so when the money does dry up, which it will, that there is some capacity on the ground to respond, because the emergency is not going away. So let's start investing and teaming up our technical program experts and knowledge and experience from the international aid community with these guys on the ground and with the communities that are going to be living with this for the next 5, 10 years. And let's start designing those programs. It's 3, 4 years in. How long do we have to wait until we start doing this? And very much from Mercy Corps' side, that's where we see our strategy going over the next year or two. We've done our service delivery, and it's now about sustainability.
Okay, let's take another round of questions. Gentleman here on the left, and the lady right behind you, and another gentleman on the left. And I'm not neglecting the right, geographically or politically. Gentleman, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentations.
Do you want to say who you are?
Rocco Bloom from Plan UK.
Okay.
So my question is about the diversity of INGOs. So besides the European, US and other Western NGOs, what is the presence and the role of the agencies from the region, from the Gulf? And just as Eva mentioned, learning lessons from previous conflicts, during the Somalia famine in 2011, that was a real steep learning curve for the Western INGOs, where we saw far greater access for the likes of the Qatari Red Crescent, the Turkish Red Crescent, and a greater affinity between those regional NGOs and local organisations.
Very good question. The lady directly behind you.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Corn. I'm a consultant working in Humanitarian Protection. I wanted to ask you a bit more about this situation with partnering with local staff, and how do you tackle that question of access and protection?
Very good question. And then the gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Richard Stanforth. I'm a policy advisor for the Middle East in Oxfam. I spend a lot of my time on questions around counterterrorism over work in Gaza or Yemen or wherever. And just a reflection, I understand we meet as international and indeed diaspora NGOs every quarter with DFID, and we've encouraged them to have meetings to discuss specifically counterterrorism. I understand that DFID have themselves got guidelines now for their staff, but it's so frightening for all of us, how we decide to give funds and the risks, the criminal risks that everybody faces, whether it's the banks and not just UK legislation, but also EU legislation. It's very complicated. But I wondered if we should, as a sector, maybe encourage them again to meet with us, and I should have maybe followed up. But maybe this we're a practitioners group.
I think that's a very good idea.
No, sorry, that's a comment. I apologise.
No, you're allowed comments. So who'd like to respond first, Rula?
To which question?
Whichever one you like.
Partnering with
Partnering.
Okay, so I'll answer your question. The Qatari Red Crescent and the Turkish Red Crescent and a couple of other Turkish and Gulf NGOs have been working prolifically in the Syria crisis, and I think we're going to see an increasing role for those organisations coming from over there. And I think that I don't really know where they sit, whether they sit as part of the the international NGOs, or are they the other? Or I'm not really sure. I feel that they're kind of a little bit new kids on the block, but not as new as us and not as old as you. And but I think an increasing role for them. And like you said, they, rightly or wrongly, I think people have an affinity to people who are similar to them, and that comes from either through race or religion. And I think, like you said, there is probably fewer trust bridges that need to be built with some of these organisations. Like I said, rightly or wrongly.
Did I understand your question correctly about is it protection of the local staff?
Yeah. How does that work in partnership?
How does inside Syria, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do we tackle this question? Because it's,
Well, I mean, there's. In short answer, there's no protection, okay? Because we can't, and it doesn't exist. But I can tell you, we've learned the lessons that our staff should be actually traveling like in a groups, okay? So none of them actually allowed to travel individually. This is also they all travel within their own local communities, and reach to certain boundaries. And if they wanted to travel further, they have to be interacting with other groups, so they actually can be known to both sides. Okay, so there's no systematic protection. It's all about the community protection. That's all. So we work with the local councils, like I said earlier. They know the staff, and they trust them, and that's the way it works. They travel in groups. We can't really travel in individuals because, like Rebecca said, if the people around you, those armed groups, if they know that you have some kind of cash in your pocket, that's gone. It's you either getting kidnapped or even killed, or it's really dangerous. So it's just a local regulation working. It's sad, but that's the way it works.
Rebecca, I think you also mentioned humanitarian protection. It's been a huge challenge in the Syria context, and again, it's one of those challenges that are shared by international protection agencies and local ones. I think quite often in the Syria context, a lot of focus has been on access rather than on protection issues. It's almost like the access debate subsumed, or protection was subsumed in the access debate. So it's been a huge problem addressing violations of international human rights law, international humanitarian law. International aid agencies have struggled with that. When we spoke to Syrian organizations, they would quite often not really see themselves as protection actors. They would not use the term necessarily, but then when you probed a little bit more, many of their activities had actually a protective benefit. And again, I think it would be an interesting area where international organizations could work more with local organizations because they have the access. I think it remains a hugely challenging area of work in Syria, but also in other contexts. But I think that's an area where they could probably work better together.
Rebecca, would you add it?
Yes, I'd agree completely with Ava. I think protection of local staff and local partners from the INGO perspective when you're in partnership with these local organisations is one of the biggest challenges we face. I mean, you can't work with every Boy Scout that turns up on your doorstep and they say, we've got a great idea, we're from X, Y, and Z community, I just hopped across the border last night and, we can do X, Y, and Z. I think the way that we have approached this is when it comes to the identification stage, when we're looking at which areas we want to work in and which partners are operating in that area and who we partner with and who we work with, we look not for a handbook, a security handbook, because that doesn't exist. We look for capacities in the organisation or the group of people. Organisation is such a broad term. The group of friends. We look for capacities to show that they have a local contextual understanding of the security environment they're in. And then we also look for their willingness to have capacity building and training in security. And by that I mean, you know, something as simple as first aid training, or something as simple as, you know, as Mazan mentioned, you know, knowing that you shouldn't go around with a backpack of cash if you're one person. You should have a system in place where you maybe have 4 or 5 people, you know, that are responsible for that, to share the risk. And so that's what we look for. And then in terms of working with our partners, as we start on a kind of, it's a tranched basis, and we increase the aid with the amount of capacity that we're kind of building across both from the operational point of view, the security and safety point of view, and the programmatic point of view. And so that's how we try and work. But it's a massive, massive challenge. I mean, we could sit on the outside and go, that's beyond our risk threshold. But who are we to sit on the outside and say X, Y, and Z? You're not allowed to do that. You are the guys on the ground. You have you know your contacts. You've been operating there for years. So we have to find a balance of shared responsibility and mutual responsibility for the safety and protection of our staff and operations on the ground.
Right. Now I'm going to take questions from the right-hand side now. And the first person who's caught my eye is a lady directly in your front.
Hi, Sandrine from MSF. Well, thank you very much for, really fascinating discussion, and I'm really excited to read the report. I guess I wanted to really question this idea that actually diaspora groups, or rather local Syrians, have access, right? Because I do think, yes, they're probably able to move in their own area with their own community, but at least in our experience, first of all, the situation has been changing so much. So, you know, today's friend is tomorrow's enemy. We've had cases of really, you know, harassment of our local staff from other Syrians, because of course, you know, it's a civil war context. So I just think that, I guess I would say, you know, and I'd be interested to hear your experiences of that. You know, we should, if you're working with 100 groups, it's because each one is working in their little location. So they're not able to cross front lines, I'm presuming. So I think this is one of the difficulties, you know, that I think is really inherent, is very problematic. I think when we talk about access, it's actually not as open access as we would think.
Right, okay. And then I think there's a lady directly behind you in green sweater.
Sorry, the mic isn't working.
Oh, gosh. Tanya.
Hi, my name is Aislinn. I'm a student at the LSE, and I'm moving a bit away from the current conversation, but given that the crisis is so long-standing and seems that it'll go on for quite a long time, I'm wondering about what you guys think about education in emergencies and the role of international and local organizations providing education, seeing as it could be a long-term
Right, okay.
solution.
And then another one. You sir with the glasses here, please.
Hi, I'm Joel Roberts from the British Council. My question is just about the sustainability of the model. So firstly, in terms of cross-border working, obviously a lot of the capacity building, particularly that's been going on, has involved Syrians crossing the border to, say, Turkey or Lebanon for training and support. It's become harder in recent times with changing border policies in Turkey and Lebanon, for example. So I wonder how you see that playing out and the role of the host country governments are going to play in delivery of programming for Syria. And the second element of that, Roland mentioned the importance of trust, and you talked about neutrality and impartiality as the currency that allows you to work. I just wonder if you have any concerns about maintaining your neutrality and impartiality in an environment where there are declining funds, and you're going further afield to find funds and support. And is there anything the international community can do to support you in maintaining, not compromising yourselves?
Okay, let's take those questions. Willow, do you want to start?
Yes. Okay, so I think on the issue of access, and you're absolutely right, Syria has been turned into very many islands, tens and hundreds of thousands of islands, and often one street is not communicating with the next, and makes it incredibly challenging. And I think the point about access is and it's what you were saying as well, is that this is the situation that we have, and we have to, and it is complicated, and it is not a straight line, and therefore we have to find the solutions that fit that complicated situation. And what's been happening until now is we've said, oh, we don't have access as we would normally, and therefore we will step away from that. And I think it's what you were saying as well, is we have to accept that higher risk that comes with dealing in these access situations. But let me just point out that the hard to reach areas. There are 4.8 million people in hard to reach areas, and one of the constant source of anguish and frustration for the Syrian NGOs is the lack of support we get from INGOs, UN agencies and funders to do any programming in these hard to reach areas. I don't need Western Ghouta to be communicating with Eastern Ghouta to do a program there, but what I need is some funding support and an NGO or a donor who understands that I can therefore, we will have to all accept increased risk, that I cannot provide the same monitoring and evaluation that I would do if I am doing it in Idlib. We have to think creatively, we have to think outside of the box, laterally, and say, right, blimey, this is really tricky, and our normal structures don't work, and that has been the people who are doing that has been the exception, but we haven't been thinking creatively enough about that. I'll stop there because I forgot what the other questions were actually. Sorry.
Can I just answer your question, the young lady from the student? Well, in Syria Relief, we actually realized the huge importance of the need for the education. It is estimated more than 500,000 actually children now out of schools over there. So we managed to partner with other NGOs and provide now schooling to like 5,000 pupils. 12 schools actually now supported inside Aleppo. I think you've heard of the city of Aleppo, the most dangerous city in the world now. These 12 schools actually providing support to 12 pupils over there. They actually working under the roof of airplanes and bombs and everything. There's no protection as such. We can't really protect these pupils, but we must provide them with education. We've got another 14 schools in the north of Syria, scattered in different areas. We are far from perfection. We're only providing support for 5,000 pupils, and we're still working on 3 more schools now, hopefully in the next school term next year. We need more support from the NGOs. We need the trust from the people inside as well. The people actually now building this trust with us to send their pupils to the schools, although they know they might, God forbid, they know they might not actually come back today. Because schools, hospitals, deliberately targeted, okay, but they have to provide them with that kind of support. We also established child protection programs now in Aleppo. We've got like 300 children over there. We're teaching them art. We're teaching them singing, dancing, that kind of activities, and we're trying to alleviate the psychological stress they're living every day. They have seen friends, siblings actually dying in front of them, going into pieces. So we are providing this kind of support now to the children. They're living the days, but it's far from perfection still.
Okay. Did you want to come in over?
Just briefly follow up on what you said, Sandrine. I think when we say Syrians have better access, there should not be an assumption that they're safer. And to think that the risks are any less. They're different, and I think that's where the shared responsibility comes in that Rebecca had mentioned, but absolutely right. Just having better access doesn't mean that it's safe. A lot of Syrians have been killed, harassed, like you say, detained. So yeah, important point.
Just one thing. someone had mentioned about sustainability and reducing funds, and you talked about what bridges emergency and development. We're not quite in recovery, but like you said, dwindling funds and increasing needs, and I guess it's sort of almost a question and a comment is how far away are we from moving towards more social enterprise models, or more sustainable financial models, let me say, so that I can say, right, I will build 10 schools, but I will not keep paying the teachers out of my own pocket because I can't afford it because I'm a very small NGO, but perhaps there is a financial business model in place that allows small fees to be collected from students that therefore will allow sustainability. That's livelihoods, it's sustainability. So I think we just need to think more creatively about how we bridge those divides, but I think those solutions are out there if we really put our minds to it.
Okay, Rebecca?
I have so many comments in response to all of your questions.
Let's get another round of questions.
You've got so many, so ignore them all.
First of all, if I may, I'd like to recognize a long-standing friend and former colleague in the UN, Martin Barber, who's here in the front row and has written about these issues recently in a book that he's had published, and has immense experience in the humanitarian field. So, Martin, wait for the... Okay.
Thank you very much for the advertisement. The book is called Blinded by Humanity, and that's not a reference to the fact that I've lost my sight. It's what happens to us when we confront humanitarian emergencies and we think we understand them, but very often we don't. I've been extremely impressed by what I've heard, and I just wanted to offer a couple of comments from past experience. I guess the situation that this most reminds me of is, sadly, Afghanistan in the 1980s, where organizations worked in very much the same way as you're describing. And the problem for learning lessons from the past is that elderly aid workers retire and go home and are often not available to pass on what they learned to the next generation. So the next generation comes along and learns the same lessons painfully. And there's a certain inevitability about that, I think. Having said that, I think that the movement towards the leadership of local organizations in the response to humanitarian emergencies is unstoppable. And it's an important trend, and one that everybody should support. And I think, and I hope, that it will get recognized at the World Humanitarian Summit, which is taking place in only just over a year's time, not very far from Syria, in Turkey. So I think I very much applaud ODI for trying to capture this experience, and hope that some of these ideas and lessons will be fed into the preparation of the World Humanitarian Summit. Just a couple of comments on things that have come up. It must be nearly 20 years ago now, there was a big debate in the UN in OCHA as to whether education counted as part of a humanitarian system. And it was eventually decided that of course it does, because you can't expect young people to go through an emergency without access to education. So any funder who says we're not going to fund education because it's not humanitarian, tell them that they're not right. So I think that's the question of mentoring. In Afghanistan, the successful Afghan NGOs, which are still going 25 years after they were founded, were supported 7 days a week for the first 3 or 4 years of their life by a UN entity. The mentoring was intense and persistent. And that mentoring and initial capacity building at establishment phase has enabled them to continue operations right through everything for the last 25 years. And if organizations that are represented on the panel now the international organizations, the UN and maybe some international NGOs, need to have as a core part of their program the mentoring and support and training, but not, as you say, not just one-day workshops or one-week workshops, but continuous, persistent support over extended periods. That's the way to do it.
Right. Martin, many thanks for that contribution. Now, amazingly, I'm starting to get questions online. It always surprises me when that happens. So the first one is from a guy called Nicholas Crawford, who's an analyst for Syria at the International Institute for Strategic Studies here in London. And in a way, it's sort of slightly linked to one of the things Martin touched on. How effective is OCHA, and particularly the Humanitarian Liaison Group, in coordinating the work of local NGOs and CBOs? Okay, so if the panel can, not immediately, Rebecca will come on full flow on that. A couple of other people over here were trying to catch my eye. Don't be shy now, I mean, it's sort of... Nobody else? Okay, gentleman here in the middle by the screen.
My name is John Whittaker, and I'm interested that the report very explicitly says that there's a huge diversity in the diaspora and the local organisations. But we know that there is a huge diversity in Syrian society as well. Is there any evidence that there is either a focus on certain parts of society, because presumably the diaspora reflects that diversity, or is there a fairly... I know there's hard to reach areas. You talked about islands, Dr. Ruler, but is there access, is there the means to get to all parts of people, access notwithstanding?
Okay, and lady here directly in front. One moment while we get the microphone to you.
Hello, my name is Lana and I work for International Alert. Okay, I have a question and it kind of links as well to the lady from MSF. Since, to use as an example access, if you can access one part, for example, Eastern Ghouta and not the Western part, how, to what extent do INGOs but also local NGOs take into account conflict sensitivity in that part? Because I actually have been trying, I haven't heard that come up yet, and I think that is actually something that is extremely important to keep in mind. And it is kind of mainstream, like in your discussions. But if you could kind of specifically say something about that, if you take this into account in your planning, in your stakeholder analysis when you do the mapping, or how it comes in for you.
Okay, thanks. Let me go to the panel and I come back to you guys. Mulham, do you want to
start? Which question? Because I can't really answer on behalf of OCHA.
No, you can't. But but don't feel inhibited if you want to make observations about OCHA department.
Okay, the gentleman.
I would encourage it.
Gentleman over there, John, I think.
John Whittaker.
Access to diverse, different people, different backgrounds. Yeah.
Backgrounds, different faiths.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you from our work, really. What's happening inside Syria? You've got now two different groups. Okay, people are actually very high, like warlords, and people are very, very, very low. 80% now of the people of the Syrian population now under the line of poverty. 80%. So if you reach 10 people inside, you reach actually 8 of them who are actually in need. I can tell you there's the rate of unemployment is reaching like 75 or 80% as well inside the country. These figures I'm giving you actually from Aleppo and the north, because I have 3 teams working on the ground with 60 people. So I've got 3 different areas, and they know exactly what information they're collecting. The factories stopped working. This is my personal experience. I've got a family still over there. My brother or my brothers can't really work anymore. Their factory is now gone. They a work of business, they're gone. There's no income. They're living on something else. I'm part of that. So there's no income. So what you can say that there's no income, but there's expenditure. The money just hemorrhaging out. So whatever you do, actually, you're helping anybody inside. This is practical. The vast majority of people now we're reaching actually living in tents or deserted buildings within the territories in the north of Syria, in Damascus, in the south as well. So I can assume these people are actually completely poor. We don't know, they don't have any kind of financial support. So we reach to them with humanitarian aid. I'm talking about food, non-food, heating, clothing. That's how we reach to them. This is the advantage of the people actually working here from a different background. We're all educated, yes, but we still feel for the people back home. We still live with them, although far away, but we still have families there, living with them every single day. We know what they're going through every day. So technically, 80% of our aid, if not 100%, I can't really be 100% sure, but 80% of our aid actually going to the needy people, at least.
80%.
At least.
Good. Eva, do you want to come in?
No, I think
okay. Rula?
I'll be critical of UN OCHA and the UN. That's
Please.
fine. But let me start from the premise of it's all with the intention of being constructive, and it's actually all with the intention of like you're saying, kind of lessons learnt, and I think what's disappointing, and it's perhaps because we are not learning from people who've been there before, they were incredibly slow to realize that there were alternative mechanisms to work inside Syria that didn't encompass working through the Syrian Red Crescent. And there were multiple INGOs, MSF being one amongst them, who were saying, the Syrian Arab Red Crescent was not delivering the UN aid to everyone who needed it. It wasn't being delivered impartially and according to neutrality to those who needed it. And that had been going on and still ongoing, and everyone knows it. And so you can say that is the biggest diversion of aid, the biggest public known to the tune of billions diversion of aid. And I can tell you that from the Syrian NGO point of view, you come to say to me and say, I'm not going to give you 10,000, I'm not sure where your aid is going to go. And I think, I'm sorry, hang on a minute. What's happening here? Why do we have those double standards? And I think that considering that they have got the experience, I think the coordination mechanism came in very late, and they still haven't really fully embraced the capacity building of Syrian NGOs. Like I said, there is some funding now available, but we haven't been able to input into that core funding, nor specific training needs. So there's room for improvement.
Now, to show that OCHA is alive and well, we actually got a question from them. It's directed to you, Rebecca.
I want to say in defense of OCHA.
And it's from a lady called Ananita Varugese. And she's asking, when were partnerships with local organizations established? Was it at the outset of the crisis, or had it been done before the crisis through context analysis of capacities? I hate to say it, but it sounds a rather OCHA-type question, actually. How do you establish relations before the crisis?
I would say, I can't speak on behalf of the whole international humanitarian community. I would say on Mercy Corps' side, it was pre-conflict knowledge. It was that contextual understanding of what was happening in Syria pre-conflict and having those links and relationships inside Syria from pre-conflict that really helped us set up from all our areas of operation. Mercy Corps was actually registered in Damascus for a couple of years before the conflict. I would like to say something in defense of OCHA, if I'm allowed.
Very appreciated.
I do agree that there has been a slow response from the international humanitarian aid community, and particularly, by the UN agencies that were in Damascus for the first year or two of the crisis. However, I think they've been constrained by the fact that INGOs from our side, when we've not been working registered from Damascus, we have been afraid to share information. We're afraid of where that information goes. We're afraid that it's going to be used by X, Y, and Z actors that might put our partners, operations, and beneficiaries at risk. So I think that's a very constraining factor. I think, though, the UN, particularly in the last, I'd say, 6 months, there's been a recognition of this. The coordination isn't working because of this mistrust between the various actors. And then something that's happened is these working groups have been set up around the sectors: protection, food security, there's health, there's several. And the way that they've set up this system is they've basically paired it with co-leads. So you have a lead from inside and a lead from outside, and you have them working together. So Mercy Corps, for example, will be co-lead on the food working group with WFP, which is registered from Damascus. And the idea behind this is to try and make those bridges. Like, if we can't formally share, 3 Ws, 4 Ws on paper, can we have those verbal conversations together by hosting and bringing together the different parts of the humanitarian community acting on the different sides? Now, where do local partners and local organisations fit into that? That's really down then to the UN system and the INGOs to bring this to the table and to make sure that there's space there to have that conversation, as we're all the same community. So in defence of OCHA, I think some steps are being taken.
Okay, thanks. I'll take 2 more questions because we're rapidly running out of time. There's a lady with a red sweater at the second row.
Hi, Rachel Winnie from the Department for International Development Syria team. I've heard quite a lot coming from the panel on the use of the word creativity, both in terms of trying to find more sustainable responses to the crisis, recognising that the funding situation is becoming more and more challenging, but also in terms of access and how do you get access to the most hard-to-reach areas. So, I guess it would be a little bit too much to ask, well, what are those creative solutions? But it would be useful to know what more could be done to foster and support that type of thinking. I think we welcome the recognition from Mercy Corps that as a donor we've been open to those sort of suggestions. Funding's been an area that we've worked hard on, with the UK government hosting an annual pledging event at UNGA for Syria, and we've also pushed very hard on access with the work on the UN Security Council resolution. So it is an area that we are very committed to, and we're aware that the situation is becoming more constraining and wanting to do more. And a second question, if I may, is just picking up on the gentleman over there's point on Gulf donors and recognising the importance of Gulf donors, particularly in a constrained resourcing environment, and what more that, particularly from an NGO perspective, and that includes Diaspora and International, can be done to bring Gulf donors into that dialogue and into that conversation, because it's very clear they're going to be part of the solution going forward, but I'm not sure that engagement has been happening systematically to date.
Okay, the gentleman directly in front of you, sorry, on the right.
Thank you. Nigel Timmins at Oxfam. I guess just trying to pick up on a couple of the themes. I think a big part of the issue is essentially risk appetite. So the extent to which an organisation is willing to fund, what kind of entity. And coming back to the comment on learning, I think it's sort of broadly accepted that the humanitarian sector has become increasingly conservative and the risk appetite has reduced. But that's largely as a consequence of repeated evaluations, critiques of aid, which have said that aid agencies have gone into conflict settings, been a bit too trusting, a bit too willing to give out money to people, and the argument that you perpetuate the conflict, that you actually advantage certain groups over other groups. We've got the whole do no harm sort of philosophy that's tried to grow out of that, and of course the whole debate around evidence in aid and whether you're doing the right things and what your evidence base for doing that is. So I suppose some of the internal debates we've been having and wrestling with is around what's the right coming together of creative approaches, taking a high risk approach, versus having the evidence because, as a colleague put it, lawyers don't do trust. Having the evidence and the rationale to articulate that you have made a positive contribution rather than inadvertently made a negative contribution.
Okay.
So, I'd be interested in how the panelists make those kind of judgments.
Well, thanks for that, Nigel. And may I ask the panel also perhaps to reflect a little on what Martin Barber raised and the fact that in Afghanistan, through the decades of various permutations of war, one striking thing has been the sort of durability of NGOs, and maybe there's some lessons there for Syria. Now, I'll start the panelists, if I may, in reverse order with Rebecca.
I'd like to address this question about sustainability and what does that look like, that creative kind of programming. And just to give an example, a besieged area, for example, where you want to provide food. And I think this ties into your point about do no harm, war economy, maybe potentially funding the siege, etc. Handouts only last so long, and when you're working in a besieged area, there are access issues, and what you can do there, you can't look at recovery because you have no influence over the political situation of what's happening around there. But what you can start looking at is things like urban gardens, things like planting seeds, things like livestock. Can you smuggle livestock in there? Can you provide that kind of support? Things like, basically, those are just a few examples of kind of household level of shifts that you can do in those kind of contexts. I want to go back to the Oxfam point of the do no harm framework and where this fits. I think it's one of the biggest challenges we face. I think as a humanitarian community, food baskets and service delivery is one of the easiest types of programming to do in this environment because it's very concrete. But when you start doing, say, unconditional cash or vouchers or etc. with these various actors, you're empowering certain parts of the community, and you have to understand your influence in the community when you're doing that kind of programming. Basically, in some, it's very challenging and very difficult. But these are the things that we do need to look at: do no harm, war economy, and sustainability. I completely agree from our perspective.
Thanks, Sarah. Rula.
I'd like to hopefully simultaneously comment on the mentoring that Martin had mentioned and representative from DFID. Firstly, starting from a position of knowing the incredible amount of support that British government has provided, but specifically on that point of creativity and supporting Syrian groups, and maybe also lessons learned for the future is that we approached DFID for funding, and they obviously said that we weren't old enough to, with the auditing, not having 3 years of auditing, etc. Perhaps a process whereby rather than being sent away, there could be a 1-year mentorship program where you can do an organizational assessment for us, really get to understand us, know who we are, and for those who pass through that initial test, then there could be a pilot scheme, small amounts of fund that we could be given for specific programs done under the guidance, and then perhaps after 1 year, if the organizations have actually been successful in implementing that program and have hit the performance targets that they that were bilaterally agreed, then perhaps the second year would go towards greater funding, further capacity building. And that comes from the mentoring, which unfortunately, I'm surprised you said that happened 20 years ago. It is not happening now. So how have we regressed in 20 years rather than gone forward? That's I found that fascinating. Bagsy, a coffee with you later. I need to pick your brain.
Okay, Eva?
I think one of the challenges in Syria is that what we're suggesting requires time, and that is kind of, we're running out of that time. But again, one concrete example, I was in Jordan last week and I spoke with one of the organizations and they suggested a pilot project. So you don't commit, millions of pounds to over 3 years, but say we can give you 500,000, we start a pilot project. And the idea of a buddy, of an INGO that has maybe more experience with partnering and would not supervise but mentor that pilot project. And then let's see, again, the evidence, it's difficult when you don't have the time to collect it, but that would be, you know, the initial phase of gathering evidence, whether it has been successful. What we found also that sometimes donors, it's more difficult for them to give small amounts rather than big amounts, because it's almost more, it costs more money to give small amounts than give big amounts. Whereas the smaller organizations, they clearly don't want the big amounts necessarily, because they themselves recognize that they don't have the operational, the organizational capacity to absorb that money. So perhaps is there a dialogue to be had on relaxing those requirements and say, okay, we will allocate 500,000 or 200,000 for a pilot project, and then we see the results.
Okay.
Can I just say there's no lack of creativity over there, actually, to be honest. There are so many ideas put on the table to execute, but there are so many challenges, so many problems. There are two major problems there. First of all, the unpredictable circumstances. Okay. I mean, we tried to finance some farmers over there to have long-lasting, you know, projects, so they look after their families and the community around them. But even these people actually now being displaced 5-6 times in a few months. So there's no sustainability for these people around, even on their own homes. If you fund these people today, they might be moving out tomorrow. The other problem is the shifting of conflict lines. I mean, for instance, we have multiple warehouses displaced in the north of Syria. Okay, just a couple of weeks ago, we lost one of them because there was a shift in the conflict. So we can't actually rely on these circumstances because they're completely volatile. These are the major problems. But the lessons we learned so far over 4 years, the best investment is investing in the people over there.
Right.
I'm proud to say that we actually now managed to take 800 people out of unemployment. So these people that we have invested now in, okay? We're looking after the children in schools. This is the best investment. It's killing me to say, I don't want to feed the people for the rest of their lives.
No.
They are still hungry. They need to eat. They need to drink. But this is not the solution. We need to have long-lasting projects. We need to have long-lasting solutions for these people. So far, from the lessons I learned, the best to invest is actually in the people over there.
Very good, and I think that's a great note to end on. Firstly, my apologies to anyone in the audience and online that I wasn't able to bring into the conversation. Secondly, to say that a video recording of this will be available online in a few days. And of course the report is online now, yes, and here in hard copy. Thirdly, and not least, refreshments will be available in the lounge outside, I'm told. But finally, and most important of all, I'd like to thank my panelists, all of whom I think were outstanding, to commend them for the extraordinary work that they're doing in Syria in some of the most challenging circumstances that we've seen over the past quarter of a century. So if you'll join me in saying thanks to them. Sarah and Eva for organizing this meeting and for leading the research here on such an important area. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.